Hello, I'm Daniela, and welcome to part 2 of the stitched mandala. In today's video, we're going to take the previous mandala that we started with our largest circle and our smallest focal point, which could also be a circle, and we're going to fill it in with concentric circles of stitches. Now today's video encompasses a lot, but it does finish up the mandala. As always, you're welcome to omit the parts you don't want, alter the stitches to use stitches that you prefer. The techniques that I show is I'll show the stitches I used to create the mandala. I'll show 3 or 4 of them. Off camera, I'll complete that circle, and then I'll come back and show you the next stitch that I use for the next circle and how I come about choosing the colors, the size of the stitch, and so on. As always, I hope you'll alter the project to suit your needs, to make it the colors that you like, the size that you find helpful, and exactly how you want it for your project. It doesn't have to look like mine. I hope you enjoy this video, so let's get started. So now we have the outermost ring stitched in our mandala and the center. What I want to do now is start building out. So I'm going to go right in between here. Now, depending on how large your mandala is, you'll have more or less circles, concentric circles. What I like to do is start and just kind of keep dividing in half. So from in half here, I'll create my next large stitching piece. And I say large because I fill it in with the thinner stitches. So right now I want to create a stitch that has a little bit of width to it. I have my 2 1/4 inch circle here. And I kind of just eyeball, knowing that the center of my piece is right here. And then I'll just sketch around here so that I have my circle right in the center here. And it's the center more or less. You can measure it out if you want to be exactly precise. Since I'm going to do the chain stitch, I have my embroidery floss threaded on my needle, and I'm using all 6 strands because the chain stitch isn't so thick. It's not going to be as thick as our outermost one here with the fern stitch. I'm going to come up at any point, and for the chain stitch, I'm going to work on either side of this line. I'm going to come up at one point just to the outer side of that line. So I'm going to come up on one side of that line and stitch down on the other side of that line, making a loop. I'm not going to pull my thread completely taut. I have a nice long loop here. I'll determine how long I want each stitch of the chain stitch to be. So I'm going to go with about 1/2 inch. And I'm going to take my needle up on the outer side of that line again and pull up. I'll gently pull my thread close. So then I'm going to eyeball about 1/2 inch for my next stitch. I have my loop that I'm creating, and I'm going to come down on the other side of that line that we sketched out, pulling my thread to make another loop, and I'm going to come up on the outer side once again, about 1/2 inch away of that thread and catching that loop. I'm going to create another loop and go right on the inside of that line. And I'll continue this all the way around this circle. I'm catching the thread on either side of that line. It's just a very small difference from one side of that line to the other. Catching that chain and continuing around. So there I stitched the chain stitch all the way around into that circle and matched up the loops to end it. So now I want to create a circle in between these two. I'm going to take out my template, figure out where I want to make it, and I'll just try and go in between here. So again, I eyeball where I think it is, and I just sketch around. And so now I want to create a multicolored ring here with different stitches. So I'm going to start by creating points of a clock. So I have my 12 o'clock, my 6 o'clock, my 3 o'clock, and my 9 o'clock. And then I think I'll add ones in between. So I like to just sketch them out that way. Now from here, I'm going to take my thread and I'm going to stitch little crosses or pluses, if you'd like, for each of these, and I'll use this color blue. In between there, after I get done with my stitches, I'm going to do a different stitch. So I'm taking the blue, and again, it's the same blue I used before. It's a 3809, and I'm just going to create my stitch. Now to make them all even, I'm going to try and eyeball them 1/4 inch on either side of the sketch circle we created. So I have my first line, and now I'll do my plus line. Or you can do a X or cross, whichever you like, and you can vary this stitch as well. So there's the first stitch. I'll continue stitching the remaining stitches around. So I've completed all my little plus stitches here, my cross stitches. So now I want to stitch in between the 2 stitches, leaving a little bit of space. But I want my stitches to have a little depth, so I'm not going to just do a straight stitch or a running stitch. What I want to do is just do straight stitches up and down instead of a cross. So I'll create 2 lines here, and all my stitches will match in between 2 lines. So I'll just continue around, following the arc of that line. I have my green thread here, my 470, and I'm just going to choose one area to start with, and I'll create my stitches, little straight stitches going up and down from one line to the next, in between each of these crosses. So I'll come up, and then I'll just evenly space it, so all my stitches are spaced evenly. I can even introduce a different color if the spacing is wide enough. So I'll try and keep that same spacing all the way around on each of these crosses. So I've stitched 3 straight stitches in between each of the plus signs, and as you can see, the mandala is starting to come together. I think I'm going to add a stitch or 2 of the yellow in between the green, but I'm going to hold off on that for now. I want to start building out another concentric circle. So again, I'll take my template, figure out what size I need, that looks pretty good. And again, I'll make my little sketch. And I have another circle here. For this circle, I have another strand of green thread on my needle, and I want to create the cable stitch. That's 2 rows of stitching. You do it one time. So again, I'll start anywhere, and I'm just going to create a straight stitch, which is just I stab through the fabric and I make a stitch. Choose whatever length you want. And then I'm going to come just below that stitch, dividing it in half, right up against it, and stitch another stitch. And I'm using the line that I drew of my circle as my guide. So my stitches are going to have just a slight little arc. And then I'll come up again onto that row with the first stitch, right where I left off, and make a stitch, and it's going to overhang a little bit from that stitch in the second row. And I'll continue this all the way around, following that circle as my guide, with 1 row of stitching slightly longer than the other row. And this gives a very interesting effect. You can do more than 1 row if you'd like. I like just those 2 stitches. And I'll finish this off. So I've cable stitched that center circle. I want to go back right now to this stitch here, this circle here, and I want to add yellow stitches in between the green stitches. I have 3 strands of embroidery floss of this beautiful yellow. It's a little bit orangey. 742 is the DMC number. So again, I'll just take my mandala and add my stitches, and I'll add 1 to the outside of the green, and then just alternate it in between the stitches until I get to the next plus, and continue all the way around. So I'll add 4 stitches of this beautiful goldenrod-y yellow color. And I'll continue doing that all the way around here. And then I want to add some yellow into maybe the center of this little lazy daisy stitch. So I have all my stitches here, and now I want to add a center using a French knot, using that yellow. So I'll take that yellow, again I have 3 strands on my needle. I'll come up here, pull my needle through so that the knot grips on the back, and then I'm going to wind my thread around my needle 3 times. I hold a little taut the thread here, keeping it taut with my thumb, press down and pull. And so now I have a beautiful French knot right in the center here. I'll knot this off. So I like the way that looks. I want to start incorporating that orange thread as well. I like the way that adds color, and then I'll go back in and fill in additional color spots with the colors I haven't used enough. So for my next one, I want to just take out my template and find the exact size. I want to go in between this green and this blue with the orange. So I'll use this little 1 3/4 inch circle. Find out a good spot for it. And I think I'm just going to do a stem stitch here. So I'll figure out where I want it to go. Trace. And then with my thread, again, I can start anywhere on my circle. I'm going to come up, create a stitch, any length that I want. And then before I finish that stitch, I'm going to come up 3/4 of the way through that stitch. And now when I pull up, it kind of comes up from behind, and it makes like a little twist. So I'll keep all my stitches the same length, coming up 3/4 of the way through the stitch, and go around that circle. And I'll continue this with this interesting stitch, and it looks very pretty, like a twisted rope. So now that I've stitched that stem stitch all the way around with the orange, I want to start filling in some of these areas, again, maintaining concentric circles. I want to start though right on the inside of this flower, the lazy daisy stitch. I'm going to put little dots here, and I want to create small French knots. And again, I think I'll use the color yellow for that. So I have 3 strands of that yellow embroidery floss, and I'll just come up here and just make a small French knot. So where I wrapped it around 3 times, I'm only going to wrap it around twice and pull that knot in. And then I'll do the same thing on all those areas where I made the dots. 2 wraps and then create that French knot. So I want to take a look at my mandala here. I could stop at any point. It's starting to really come together, but I do feel like there's a little bit of space in between this outer ring and the next ring. So I want to start working in there. Again, I want to start repeating the colors. So I'll use the orange again. I like to use that color in there. I think I'll just stitch a back stitch. So I'll try and come here and create that circle. Now I don't want it to be a full circle, so I'll just make a little guide. And I'm just going from cross to cross, or plus to plus, trying just to keep that arc going. So that kind of creates a little bit of a circle. And then I'll do the same thing on the inside. So now I want to take my thread, my orange thread. Again, I have 3 strands here, and I'm just going to do a back stitch. So I'll start on the outside here. and follow that arc, just doing that back stitch. And that's a fun little stitch. It's a classic stitch look. It'll add a little more texture and a little more dimension, as well as pick up that color orange. So I have one little bit finished. I'll continue all the way around with that back stitch. So I've stitched that line with that orange, that 351, using the back stitch. So now I have that one line on the center here, this circle, and I want to play around with that a little bit. What I think I'm going to do is take my yellow thread, and I have just 3 strands from when I made those little French knots, and I'm going to incorporate additional French knots. Now I'm going to go off that concentric circle, and so everywhere that my plus size ends, I'm going to create a little French knot kind of on that circle, but it's just going to go in between the blue chain stitch and this stitch here. So I have my thread. I'll make my French knots on those dots using just 3 strands of floss, and I'll wrap it around twice. Pull it down, and so on, going around the circle. And then I'll come in with my orange thread, and I'm just going to stitch a running stitch in between the beginning and the end of that arc. So I'll finish up with my French knots, and then I'll go and do that running stitch and show you how it looks. So I finished my stitches as well as my French knots, and I'm really pleased with the way this looks all completed. Now you could continue this further. You could add additional French knots or additional stitches in between the existing ones. You can continue as much as you want and take this as far as you want to go. There are different effects, but the stitched mandala is the same technique. You're filling in that circle with other circles, concentrically, from smallest to largest. And you can throw in a little off circle here and there, just some extra stitches, just to make it really fill out and look finished. So that's how I finish up my stitched mandala. I don't do it in a formation where I start at the largest circle and I work my way in, or I start in the center and work my way out. I kind of jump around. Might not be the most effective use of my time, but I like the results. I like the way I can create the balance that I'm looking for in the circle, the intricacy, and the number of varied stitches. It's really based on my mood of the day or how I'm feeling, which is the whole point of slow stitching. It's about the process and creating something beautiful and enjoying the process of creating that something beautiful. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, please give it a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. If you create your own stitched mandala, please post it on Instagram and be sure to tag me. I really would love to see it. Thanks for joining me today.